Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Money. It's the root of all evil policy. In those moments when you ask yourself, how could they possibly just stop, reverse, and remember? Money. If you've been following the protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline, then you know the basic gist. Energy Transfer Partners and their operator, Dakota Access, have a plan to transport roughly 400 to 570,000 barrels per day of crude oil from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota to Patoka, Illinois. In order to do so, they gotta build a pipeline, like the one that did this, or this. But Eleanor, that's just pictures of pipelines leaking. Yeah, I know, because that's what they do. In 2015, there were more than 270 pipeline leaks. A 20-year study between 1995 and 2014 found that the average is about 280 pipeline leaks a year, totaling more than 220 million barrels of petroleum products leaked into the environment, with most of those accidents resulting from both equipment failure and corrosion. And get this, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, aka PHMSA, is, as its name might suggest, tasked with trying to avoid leaking pipelines. However, they lack the resources to inspect the pipelines that they have jurisdiction over. Consider this, as of 2015, PHMSA had jurisdiction over 72,466 miles of crude oil pipeline. That's just crude oil. They're also in charge of LNG, gas, petroleum products, and hazardous liquid pipelines. And all of those categories, roughly 2.7 million miles of pipeline, are watched over and inspected by 188 inspectors. So with this in mind, it might not come as much of a surprise that the majority of on-site pipeline inspection is done by the pipeline companies themselves. And now we can begin to see a bit of a problem. But that's not all. Apparently, to further cut down on pesky research and development, PHMSA also adopts dozens of safety standards written by the oil and gas industry. And I have plenty of expletives to throw at that nonsense, but as Carl Weimer, executive director of the Pipeline Safety Trust, more eloquently put it, this isn't like the fox guarding the henhouse, it's like the fox designing the henhouse. And in light of that, it makes sense that in the period between 2002 and 2010, for every 5 significant incidents reported at a hazardous liquid pipeline, the agency issued 1 fine. Because what's little hazardous liquid or oil spill between friends, huh? If I weren't so cynical of Congress ever doing anything useful, I'd say it's no surprise that in June of this year, Congresswoman Jackie Speier introduced a bill to hold PHMSA accountable, saying, quote, "Despite the deaths of 8 of my constituents in San Bruno in 2010, Congress continues to rubber stamp PHMSA's weak and ineffective oversight with each reauthorization. I refuse to accept the status quo from the oil and gas pipeline industry that explosions are a cost of doing business. We need to take every possible avenue to ensure that PHMSA fulfills its duties." If I were to hazard a guess, I'd say she doesn't get bankrolled by said oil and gas companies, or at the very least, not anymore. Her pals in Congress, however, yeah, they do. According to Open Secrets in 2015, the oil and gas industry pumped $129.9 million into lobbying Congress, $1.25 million of which came directly from Energy Transfer, the company pushing through the Dakota Access Pipeline. Furthermore, this year alone, Congress has received more than $22 million in direct contributions from the oil and gas industry, and the year's not over. Nor, indeed, is the fight over the Dakota Access Pipeline, so my guess is that we're going to see those numbers rise even more in the coming months. And with all that money flowing to Congress, these oil and gas companies got to save some pennies where they can. For example, in the construction of the pipelines themselves. You may recall back in April, more than 16,000 gallons of TransCanada's oil spilled into South Dakota after a landowner discovered the leak. Evan Vokes, a former TransCanada materials engineer, would later testify to the Canadian Senate that neither of those facts were surprising. The latter because, quote, "Passersby or landowners are usually more reliable detectors of pipeline ruptures than automated leak detection systems employed by pipeline operators like TransCanada." Great. And the reason for that is the same reason why Vokes wasn't surprised that the damn pipeline leaked in the first place. Yeah, you guessed it, money. Apparently, many pipelines utilize cheap pipe in what's known as transitional welds at key joints that, put simply, suck. As Vokes bluntly put it, this project made the decision, consciously, that they thought they'd save some money and they would go as cheap as they could. So they bought cheap pipe and they used transitional welds. And as further elaborated, those welds are a problem because a tiny crack in a weld can leak for years before it's found, because leak detection systems are only capable of detecting leaks when a pipeline's volume drops by 2% in the course of a day. I don't know what 2% of 570,000 gallons is, but it's a lot. So really, we just need to have farmers walking around the veritable light year of shitty welding and shitty detectors, because both of those are about as useful as stopping oil leaks as a fucking colander, and probably just about as cheap. Spare the proper construction and spoil Congress and private security outfitted with pepper spray and attack dogs, as the saying goes. Think about it. Those meaty chunks of protester just cost this poor oil company another properly welded joint. Serves you right for peacefully protesting the sacred grounds of your ancestors and your drinking water. When this fucking pipeline leaks into said water supply, you'll have no one to blame but yourselves. And if you don't really know what the hell I'm talking about, let me quickly sum it up. The Dakota Access Pipeline will cross the Missouri River, which, by the way, supplies drinking water for millions, including, but certainly not limited to, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Indeed, the Dakota Access Pipeline is slated to cross 209 rivers, creeks, and tributaries, and an untold number of wetlands, not to mention the fact that the Dakota Access Pipeline will connect to another pipeline, twistedly named Sacagawea, that will then take the oil back across the Missouri in a different location. Meanwhile, a pipeline contractor who worked on Sacagawea said in a sworn testimony that he was ordered to not conduct a final inspection on the pipe before it was pulled under the river in July. He said whenever contractors did inspections, they found bare spots that needed to be recoated to prevent corrosion from the outside in. Shocking, but not surprising. When foxes build hen houses, there's going to be some gaping holes. And speaking of foxes, let's get back to those dogs. Less than 24 hours after Standing Rock Sioux filed court documents identifying sacred sites adjacent to the pipeline's projected path, Energy Transfer construction crews got up bright and early to bulldoze the exact areas described in the court documents. Tim Mentz, former historic preservation officer for the Standing Rock Sioux, filed the original papers on September 2nd. And in his support of motion for a temporary restraining order on construction, which was later denied, he described how the construction crews targeted these precise places of historical and cultural importance. I do not believe that the timing of this construction was an accident or coincidence. Based on my observations, the nearest area of construction in the right-of-way west of Highway 1806 is around 20 miles away. It appears that DAPL drove the bulldozers approximately 20 miles of uncleared right-of-way to access the precise area that we surveyed and described in my declaration. The work started very early in the morning, and they were accompanied by private security with dogs and with a helicopter overhead, indicating that the work was planned with care and that controversy was expected. And indeed, controversy ensued, as expected, when protectors flocked to these sacred sites in order to halt further destruction, only to be met with pepper spray and attack dogs, who bit 6 people, including a pregnant woman and a child, making it even more clear that their intention was to get this shit cleared, so that a few irreplaceable artifacts in sacred land wouldn't stand in the way of their goddamn pipeline. Because pipelines make money, and dead people don't. As Dallas Goldtooth, executive director of Indigenous Environmental Network, explained, in order for construction to be halted, the North Dakota State Historic Preservation Office had to come and officially survey the site, because it was in their jurisdiction. So what did Dakota Access do? They plowed through the land before the SHPO could come to do the surveys. And as Ben Alex Dupree, member of the Cheyenne River Sioux, told DSmog blog, the company knows that they can just bulldoze the site, destroy the evidence, and pay a fine, because That's how we treat big oil and gas. Slap on the wrist, thank you, carry on. And this is how we treat Native Americans. It's your fault for being on our land before we got here, which was made even more evident this past Friday when a federal judge denied the Standing Rock Sioux request to halt construction of the pipeline, claiming that there was no evidence to suggest that they would suffer from its construction. Less than an hour later, however, the Army, the DOJ, and the Department of the Interior issued a joint statement halting construction on federal lands, quote, bordering or under Lake Oahe until it can determine whether it will need to reconsider any of its previous decisions. Therefore, construction of the pipeline on Army Corps land bordering or under Lake Oahe will not go forward at this time. In the interim, we request that the pipeline company voluntarily pause all construction activity within 20 miles east or west of Lake Oahe. So we'll get to that request in voluntary jargon in a minute, but first, let's see about this Lake Oahe. The red marker is Lake Oahe, the largest of 4 Missouri River reservoirs, situated along the Missouri River just east of the Cheyenne River Reservation and just north of the Oahe Dam. Keep that upside-down Y shape below the river in mind, because you'll see it again. Now, originally, the pipeline's path was further north, as you can see, still crossing the Missouri in North Dakota, but not a direct threat to Lake Oahe. Although, as is obvious, if oil were to leak into the river in North Dakota, it wouldn't be stopped at the border of South Dakota. But now, the proposed path crosses right under Lake Oahe. There's that upside-down Y area again, because officials decided that to have it so close to the capital of Bismarck as originally planned would be dangerous in case of a leak. But, fuck this lake and its drinking water, because fuck indigenous peoples, their land, their water, and their lives. So, now that we understand why Oahe, what the hell does Friday's decision really mean? Well, unfortunately, not that much. As Joy Brown explained in a live video last Friday, this joint statement is essentially, quote, asking Dakota Access not to do any construction 20 miles east or west. It's just voluntary. Although the company does not currently have access to Army Corps land, which includes under the river, they are, quote, still laying pipe in South Dakota. They're still laying pipe in Iowa. And she reminded people that the James River and the Mississippi rivers are also at risk. She closed with saying, quote, it's a win, but it's also a cautious win. The Sacred Stone camp echoed that statement with experienced cynicism as to the do-gooding of the U.S. government, posting, quote, we have seen time and time again a consistent strategy from the state in these situations. String out the process, break it to us gradually to avoid a big confrontation, present the illusion of careful, thoughtful review of the case, tempt us with promises of modest reforms, but then in the end, make the same decision that serves money, not people. So far, this is just talk, not actions, and actions are all we should care about. Stop the pipeline, and then we'll celebrate. We're not leaving until this is over. Indeed, someone at the camp told us that protectors are gearing up to winterize, and the plan is to stay there indefinitely. The Standing Rock Sioux also plan to appeal the court decision that came down just before the joint statement, but are also realistic in their expectations, explaining their plans to go to the U.S. Court of Appeals if their initial appeal is ignored. So, the fight continues. Taking a line from Rousseau, the idea isn't to throw garlands on our chains, it's to remove the chains. And going up against a multi-billion-dollar, totally unchecked and unaccountable industry with a, please, do you think, would you mind, sir, isn't going to cut it. So to learn more and to join the solidarity fight to specifically target the financial institutions making this pipeline possible through a $3.75 billion line of credit such as Bank of America, HSBC, UBS, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, and others, visit nodaplsolidarity.org.